North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. I'm over here. Sorry, I was doing some camera testing. See, I have two cameras now. See, I can go over here, and then I can go over here. See, I have two. Soon, we'll have three cameras. You know what that means? It means I'm going to get carpal tunnel syndrome, switching the cameras. That's what that means. This is the Wells Report. We bring you the news. We bring you analysis. We bring you commentary and debate. The debate is intended for us to be able to have a check and balance on the commentary, because I happen to believe that it's very important that you have your say. And you having your say is essential for this conversation to succeed, which is what this is. This is a conversation. This is the first, as far as I know, the first completely interactive newscast anywhere in the world. Because you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me on the telephone. The telephone number is right there. Actually, that's the telephone. The number is that gets you to the phone is 817-379-2172. You can also find us on chat, because we have chats all over the place. Okay, so chats all over, and we're looking forward to you availing yourself of those as well. Today is an incredibly sad day for the entire world. It is awful. And we start our coverage with the assassination of ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He died at age 67. He was making a speech. And in the middle of that speech, somebody came up behind him and shot him twice. This from USA Today. Shinzo Abe, Japan's longest-serving prime minister, died at the age of 67 after being shot during a campaign speech in Western Japan. It was a shocking attack in a country that has some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. Abe was shot from behind minutes after he started his speech in the city of Nara. He collapsed bleeding, was airlifted to a nearby hospital in Nara, although he was not breathing and his heart had stopped. This, according to the Associated Press. He was later pronounced dead after receiving massive blood transfusions. Police immediately arrested a male suspect, identified as 41-year-old Tetsuya Yamagami, at the scene of the shooting. According to Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno, officials said he used a gun that was clearly homemade. They confiscated similar weapons and his personal computer when they raided his nearby one-bedroom apartment. This, according to the Associated Press. The Japanese broadcaster NHK reported Yamagami worked for the Maritime Self-Defense Force for 3 years around 2005. He said he wanted to kill Abe because he had complaints about him unrelated to politics. This, according to NHK. Police said that Yamagami was responding to questions and admitted attacking Abe. Japan's current prime minister, Fumio Kishida, called the assassination dastardly and barbaric. The first person that came through from the United States was President Donald Trump. He and Abe were very, very close friends. Hours later, in Washington, President Joe Biden said he was stunned, outraged, and deeply saddened by Abe's assassination. This is a tragedy for Japan and all who knew him, Biden said in a statement. He called Abe a champion of the alliance between our nations and the friendship between our people. Biden told reporters he planned to stop at the Japanese embassy in Washington on this afternoon to sign a condolence book. He said he reached out to Kishida but was unable to make contact because of the time difference. President Biden ordered flags at the White House, public grounds, embassy, and military facilities to be flown at half-staff in memory of Abe until July 10th. NHK aired footage showing Abe collapsed in the street with several security guards running toward him. He was bleeding and holding his chest. 2 apparent gunshots are audible in the video. The video also shows security guards tackling the apparent gunman to the ground. A double-barrel device that appeared to be handmade can be seen on the ground. Japan has some of the strictest gun laws in the world. Prospective owners must undergo formal instruction as well as written, mental, and drug tests and a rigorous background check. Abe was making a campaign speech ahead of Sunday's parliamentary elections. Kishida said the election for Japan's less powerful upper house of parliament would go on as planned. Abe became Japan's prime minister in 2006. He was 52, making him the youngest leader to hold the post at the time. He resigned a year later after his Liberal Democratic Party lost control of the legislature amid his own health issues. He was elected to lead the Liberal Party again in 2012, elevating him to prime minister a second time in December of that year. He led the country until August 2020, announcing his resignation when his illness resurfaced. During his second stint as prime minister, Abe worked to revitalize the nation and get its economy out of the deflationary doldrums with his Abenomics formula, which combined fiscal stimulus, monetary easing, and structural reforms. He was a conservative. His nationalism riled the Koreas and China, and his push to normalize Japan's defensive posture angered many Japanese. Abe failed to achieve his cherished goal of formally rewriting the U.S.-drafted pacifist constitution due to public opposition. Following his resignation, Abe remained an influential political figure in the Liberal Democratic Party. Former President Donald Trump, who responded first, said it was absolutely devastating news. Abe was a true friend of mine, and more importantly, America's. Trump said in a message on his social media platform, "This is a tremendous blow to the wonderful people of Japan who loved and admired him so much." Rahm Emanuel, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, said he was deeply saddened by the news of Abe's death. Prime Minister Abe was a leader ahead of his time. The clarity of his voice will be truly missed. The United States has lost a trust partner and an outspoken advocate for our shared ideals. That's the way USA Today reported the story. CNN tells it this way in their update format. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe died after being shot during a campaign speech today. He was 67. Abe served two separate terms as the Japanese leader for the right-leaning Liberal Democratic Party, the first from 2006 to 2007, and then from 2012 until 2020. His second stint was the longest consecutive term for a Japanese head of government. He was born September 21st, 1954 in Tokyo to a prominent political family. Both his grandfather and his great-uncle served as prime minister. His father was former Secretary General of the Liberal Democratic Party. Abe was first elected to Japan's House of Representatives in 1993 at age 38. He held a number of cabinet positions throughout the 2000s. 2003 became Secretary General of the LDP. 4 years later, he was named the party's president and became Prime Minister of Japan. His first term was marred by controversies and worsening health. He stepped down as party leader and prime minister in 2007. The end of Abe's first term opened a revolving door, which 5 different men held the prime minister post in 5 years until his reelection in 2012. He stepped down in 2020, citing ill health. After leaving office, he remained the head of the largest faction of the ruling LDP and remained influential within the party. He has continued to campaign for stronger security policies, and last year angered China by calling for a greater commitment from allies to defend democracy in Taiwan. In response, Beijing summoned Japan's ambassador and accused Abe of openly challenging China's sovereignty. Abe will be remembered for boosting defense spending and pushing through the most dramatic shift in Japanese military policy in 70 years. In 2015, his government passed a reinterpretation of Japan's post-war pacifist constitution, allowing Japanese troops to engage in overseas combat with conditions for the first time since World War II. Abe argued the change was needed to respond to a more challenging security environment, a nod to a more assertive China and frequent missile tests in North Korea. During his term, Abe sought to improve relations with Beijing and held a historic phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in 2018. At the same time, he tried to counter Chinese expansion in the region by uniting Pacific allies. He attempted to build a personal relationship with former U.S. President Donald Trump, as Washington's relationship with Pyongyang tipped toward diplomacy, with both Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in holding historic summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Abe said he was determined to meet Kim. Abe wanted to normalize relations with North Korea and ease tension in the Korean Peninsula. But his first priority was to bring closure for the families of Japanese citizens abducted by North Korea in the 70s and the 80s. During his tenure, Japan's relations with South Korea soured. The two countries were engaged in a major dispute in which trade and military intelligence deals were scrapped, partly due to the legacy of World War II and Japan's brutal colonization of the Korean Peninsula. Abe came to office during a time of economic turmoil, soon set about rebooting Japan's economy after decades of stagnation. Soon he was reelected prime minister in 2012. He launched a grand experiment popularly known as Abenomics. It included three so called arrows: massive monetary stimulus, increased government spending, and structural reforms. After a strong start, it faltered, and in 2015, Abe fired the three new arrows designed to boost gross domestic product. Any hopes they might eventually hit their mark were dashed when COVID-19 swept through the country in 2020, tipping Japan into recession. One of Abe's major domestic achievements was securing the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, but the success of the much anticipated Tokyo Games was ultimately undone by COVID-19, which forced the competition to be delayed until 2021. Abe declared a state of emergency months after the first cases were detected. His administration was criticized for the low rate of testing and early lack of specialist medical equipment to treat the rising number of patients. More successful was Abe's handling of the abdication of Emperor Akihito, the first Japanese monarch to step down in 2 centuries. He was succeeded by his son, Emperor Naruhito, that's Naruhito, in October 2019, starting the Reiwa era. He is survived by his wife, Aki Abe ni Matsuzaki, who he married in 1987. The couple did not have children. U.S. President Joe Biden ordered flags to be lowered to half-staff until July 10th following the death of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Writing in a presidential proclamation, the late Prime Minister was a proud servant of the Japanese people and a faithful friend to the United States. Quote, he worked with American presidents of both parties to deepen the alliance between our nations and advance a common vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Even in the moment he was attacked and killed, he was engaged in the work of democracy, to which he dedicated his life. Biden also signed a condolence book for Abe at the Japanese ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. He laid a small wreath of flowers on the table as well. Japanese ambassador to the U.S., Koji Tomita, greeted Biden for the condolence book signing, according to reporters traveling with the president. American and world leaders all recoiling in horror at all of this. We'll be discussing that coming up in just a few minutes. From USA Today, there was a listing of how he was actually killed. He was a member of the governing Liberal Democratic Party. He was killed in the city of Nara in western Japan at about 11:30 a.m. We'll have more about that coming up in just a couple of moments here on the Wells Report. We are bringing you the news. We bring you analysis for fact. We report those facts, and we also make commentary. That is my opinion. My opinion is not news. My opinion is only my opinion. It's just as valuable as yours. Please do share yours. 817-379-2172. That's 817-379-2172. Also, you can join us on chat. I'm looking at that right this very minute. I want to say hi to Yvonne and Jessica and Mike and Gary. Good to have you here. Thanks very much for all of your kind attention as we bring you the Wells Report for Friday. Back with more in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. As we have been reporting, Shinzo Abe, a member of the governing Liberal Democrat Party, was killed in the city of Nara in western Japan this morning at about 11:30. The gunman shot Abe from behind as the former prime minister delivered a campaign speech outside a train station. Dramatic video captured by NHK, the Japanese news agency, a Japanese media service, shows Abe wearing a navy blue outfit falling to the ground after two large bangs, which appeared to be gunshots. Security guards immediately jumped on the attacker. Abe was quickly not breathing. His heart stopped, according to reports, but he was airlifted anyway to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead. He suffered major damage to his heart and two neck wounds that damaged an artery, according to the Nara Medical University Emergency Department Chief Hidetada Fukushima. Police arrested the suspected gunman, Tetsuya Yamagami, 41 years of age, a former member of the Japanese Navy. NHK reports the suspect wanted to kill Abe because of complaints with him unrelated to politics. The gun found at the scene was about 15 inches long. It appeared to be handmade. Police confiscated similar weapons from his home, a nearby one-bedroom apartment. Police said Yamagami admitted to shooting Abe. Abe was campaigning for a candidate running in the Sunday parliamentary election. The gunshots rang out as Abe raised his left hand to make a point. He resigned as prime minister 2 years ago after serving two terms, from 2006 to 2007, again from 2012 to 2020. He announced his resignation in 2020, saying because of poor health, he was no longer able to serve. Abe sought to revise Japan's constitution, which renounces the use of force in international conflicts and limits Japan's military to self-defense. The constitutional revision was failed because of lack of public support, but still has the backing of many ultra-conservatives. Abe felt Japan was judged unfairly for its role in World War II and promoted the country's post-war record of economic success, peace, and global cooperation. Critics accused him of trying to whitewash Japan's actions during the war, and his ultra-nationalism angered both Koreas and China, wartime adversaries of Japan. President Biden called Abe a champion of the alliance between our nations and the friendship of our people. Biden said, "I am stunned, outraged, deeply saddened by the news that my friend Abe Shinzo, a former prime minister of Japan, was shot and killed while campaigning." His name is actually Shinzo Abe. "This is a tragedy for Japan and all who knew him." Former President Barack Obama said he was shocked and saddened by Abe's assassination. "I will always remember the work we did to strengthen our alliance, the moving experience of traveling to Hiroshima and the Pearl Harbor together, and the grace he and his wife, Aki Abe, showed to me and Michelle." Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who hastily returned to Tokyo from campaign events around the country, called the shooting dastardly and barbaric. French President Emmanuel Macron tweeted, "On behalf of the French people, I send my condolences to the Japanese authorities and the people after the assassination of Shinzo Abe. Japan is losing a great prime minister who dedicated his life to his country and worked to bring balance to the world." India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced that Saturday as a one-day national mourning as a mark of deepest respect for Abe. Mr. Abe made an immense contribution to elevating India-Japan relations to the level of a special strategic and global partnership. Today, whole India mourns with Japan, and we stand in solidarity with our Japanese brothers and sisters in this difficult moment. It is awful. It is absolutely awful. I am reminded of a line in one of Elton John's songs, how one insect can destroy so much grain. What will happen? We will see. We will see. There is more as we continue on this broadcast today, bringing more information about the gun laws in Japan, and we'll talk a little bit more about the various responses from world leaders. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. We are bringing you the news, the real news. That you are here belies the fact that Americans have less trust in American television news in at least my lifetime. And it's something they've earned. You have to do the news. You simply have to do the news. And that's what we do here. It's interactive. You can contact us anytime you'd like. And you can do so two ways. You can call us at 817-379-2172. Or you can contact us via chat going on right now. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook. Thanks very much for being with us today on Friday. So Shinzo Abe, Japan's former prime minister, was gunned down while giving a campaign speech. Footage aired by the Japanese public broadcaster NHK showed Abe collapsing on the street, bleeding and holding his chest with several security guards running toward him. The shooting sent Abe, 67, into cardio and pulmonary arrest. His heart stopped while being airlifted to the hospital. He was pronounced dead a little later. Tetsuya Yamagami has been arrested, according to NHK. The shooter apparently used a double-barreled handmade gun. It was seen on the ground, according to the Associated Press. The shooting death of Japan's longest-serving prime minister stunned the largely gun-free nation, given the rarity of gun violence. In 2021, they had one gunshot murder. One. They have been regulated in Japan since the mid-16th century. This according to an analysis by the Library of Congress. By the way, USA Today provided us with this news. In 1588, Japan ruler Hideyoshi Toyotomi announced a sword hunt, which banned civilians from owning swords and firearms. Over the next 200 years, a series of stricter measures were put into place, according to the analysis. Japan's Firearms and Sword Council law says that in principle, the possession of firearms and swords is prohibited. Only shotguns, air guns, guns with specific research or industrial purposes, or those used for competitions, are legal in Japan. The prospective gun owners under 18, 14 for talented athletes, bankrupt, mentally ill, addicted to drugs without a fixed home, or with a criminal record are not allowed to purchase guns, according to the Library of Congress. Individuals with warnings or restraining orders for stalking or domestic violence, plus any individual who can, quote, reasonably be expected, unquote, to harm themselves or others are not allowed to bear arms. Owning a gun in Japan requires formal instruction, a rigorous background check, including mental health assessments and drug tests. Prospective gun owners will also have to tell Japan's Public Safety Commission where they will store the gun and how they plan to use it. Gun violence in Japan has remained low for at least a decade, according to data from Statista. In 2021, there were 10 gun shooting incidents, 8 of which were tied to crime syndicate groups. Some 17 gun shooting incidents occurred in 2020, 13 in 2019, and 8 in 2018. The estimated total number of guns in 2020 was 310,000. Make that 2019 was 310,400, according to Japan's National Police Agency. Just 0.25% of civilians in Japan are estimated to possess firearms. For comparison, 32% of American adults reported owning a firearm, this according to Gallup. And so we have an essentially very peaceful society, one that has outlawed guns for centuries. Why? The reason that guns were outlawed in Japan was because they were under totalitarian rule, complete totalitarian rule. And they have built an entire nation around what happens to a population under totalitarian rule. You will either do what you were told, or you will be killed. And of course, the record of Japan during the Second World War is abominable. There were unbelievably huge numbers of war crime trials after the end of the Second World War. and it was carried out with precision. The sentences were carried out with precision and in short order. I expect the same thing will happen here. There is something that you have to keep in mind. A totalitarian society has weeded out anyone who does not completely and totally comply. We don't have that here. In fact, the United States of America is the only nation that I'm aware of. And I've done some serious work that does not have a direct link to totalitarian rule. We do things differently here. Not only is it okay for us to own weapons, it is part of our law and part of our Constitution that we be able to defend ourselves directly. We find ourselves in a position where we have gun violence at a high level. Not gun violence so much, because gun violence is a term of art. It's a political term to describe a part of America that would-be totalitarians simply don't want to live with. These would-be totalitarians would have weapons taken away from anyone for whatever reason, in an effort to rid itself of anyone who would disagree with the same kind of invitation that came from our framers of this nation. They were extremely suspicious of totalitarian rule. That's why in 1776, when the nation began, we rejected it in all forms. We made it absolutely essential that Americans know that not only can they defend themselves, but they can also defend their nation as they see fit. The oath that all of us take who are in the United States military. I'm a Texas State Guard soldier. By the way, none of the things I say have anything to do with the Texas State Guard or the Texas Military Department. Tells us that we will defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The proudest words I've ever spoken. It's amazing how many people speak those very same words, but only their mouths move. Their hearts remain still. But all of us, everyone in public office, everyone says the same oath. What happens to it? Well, just as the framers of this nation realized absolute power corrupts absolutely, and the idea that there is a class of people out there that simply know more than anybody else has taken root in the United States. As we come to this conversation, we have a government that acts of the government, for the government, and by the government, which is not the way this nation was built. This nation was built, indeed, as a nation that had a government that served the people, a government of the people, for the people, by the people. We, the people of the United States, have abdicated our responsibilities over the decades, and yes, centuries, certainly not with the same level of ancient history as Japan, but we have centuries behind us as well. And this notion that somehow you can sweep all that away and trade it for an overarching government that tells you everything is simply abhorrent to all of us. We have seen in our lifetimes governments essentially functioning as execution squads, the government of our United States. Things are oftentimes not necessarily swept under the rug. An awful lot of the enforcement circumstances that we are able to discuss, they're taken care of behind the scenes. But they are taken care of, which is why it happens relatively rarely in the United States. All of that got swept aside when Nancy Pelosi, in response to the January 6th riot at the Capitol, decided to encircle the entire Capitol complex with a razor wire fence and fill it with 26,000 United States troops, all carrying real weapons of war, and all of them pointed at us. All of them. They're expecting we, the people of the United States, to openly revolt. And there are a lot of different ways that you can look at that. You can say, well, yeah, the government has got to be able to have some authority to be able to function. But if you are concerned that the people might be revolting to the point where they would show up with weapons at the Capitol, which very few, if any, people did. And when I say weapons, I'm talking about firearms. There were a few. There were some knives and so on. But the circumstance goes like this. If you don't want the people to rebel, perhaps what you should do is not do things that cause the people to rebel. That's something that is lost in the thought process of these people. And they're still in power. Why are they still in power? Because we let them be in power. Because in our constant gnashing of teeth between one part of America and another part of America, we are distracted from the reality that the people we need to be looking at very skeptically and even suspiciously are simply watching us fight with each other as they go about their business. And it is their business. We, the people of the United States, should rally around the things that made this country great. And probably at the top of the list, the Bill of Rights. We should all come together and defend those bills, those rights, God-given as they are, as opposed to government-given, as we find ourselves in a position where we fight with ourselves so much we forget who the actual problems are. Make no mistake, we have absolutely no excuse. These people have raided the public treasury to the tune of $28.8 trillion more than was given to them. Don't get me wrong. Alexander Hamilton talked about how important a national debt actually is to a national economy. What it does is it's supposed to chasten those people spending money to not spend it. Just like having the most successful credit card in the world, the one that you pay off every single month, sometimes gets out of control, and before you know it, you're $20,000 or $30,000 in debt. Well, the federal government has done that to the tune of $28.8 trillion, an amount of money that is so big, it defies reality. How are we going to get that under control? I don't know. The last time we had a problem of that nature, expenditures versus gross domestic product, was World War II. There hasn't been World War. There hasn't been World War since then. How did we get so deeply in debt? My favorite example is the Apollo project, where we put men on the moon 50 years ago. We put men on the moon. We haven't been back since. And you know what the argument was then? Why are we spending all that money in space when we should be spending it here? Well, we've been spending it here. The rest of the world has caught up. And so here we are. All this spending being made and very little to look at and say, that is a national achievement. You know, somebody just said, let's see, so they had one murder last year, one gunshot murder. That may not necessarily be the case, but it's certainly under 10, okay? I heard that earlier this morning. That may have been corrected. One gunshot murder. Someone says, seems like their gun laws work very well. Well, yeah, they do. It's amazing what you can get an entire populace to do after you have ruled them with an iron fist for centuries. And you finally get to a point where what you do is your nationalist ideologies lead you to a world war where you send your troops out to do atrocious and horrific things that people still remember. And then somebody pays you back by dropping 2 nuclear weapons on your country. It's amazing how pacified a population will be under those terms. I'm not sure I don't like the rough and tumble bar fight of the people of the United States better. But then again, that's just a matter of opinion, matter of thought. You're listening to the Wells Report. Thanks very much for doing so. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. We'll be back in just a few more minutes as we continue to discuss all of this and what the media has been saying. Next on the Wells Report. Stay right there. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Fox News has come up with an article regarding the cackling, what they call the cackling of leftist commentators regarding the deaths of what they consider to be nationalist or populist or conservative leaders and media figures. Early this morning, former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe died in the hospital after being shot during a campaign speech. NPR immediately tweeted out news of his death, labeling him as a divisive arch-conservative. In the attached piece, NPR went on to say that Abe's ultra-nationalism riled Koreans and the Chinese, and noted he failed to resolve issues of Japanese citizens abducted by North Korea. NPR also knocked the former prime minister for his revision of the country's war-renouncing constitution. The left-wing nonprofit was swiftly slammed by social media users. Will they pay attention to that? I don't know. I don't have any idea. But PBS needs to decide what it's doing. Is it a public broadcasting system? PBS? Or is it just another left-wing opinion outlet? They need to decide what they want to do. If it's a left-wing opinion outlet, that's okay with me. That's fine. They can do anything they want to, but they can do it without federal money. Just go ahead and turn pro. Just do the right thing. Just go ahead and become whatever you want to call yourself. But don't do it with public money. You should be straight down the line. If you don't know how to do it, give me a call. I'll be more than happy to explain it to you. As a matter of fact, there was a time when I actually applied to be on NPR, and they gave me some mumbo jumbo about they were looking for a different kind of broadcaster. Oh, I see. Yeah, I know what kind they were looking for. Once again, it's amazing what you can say on a microphone like this, in a situation like this, and how people can hear what you say. And I'm pretty good at this communication thing. I've been doing it now for almost 50 years. 50. Yeah, I'm pretty well versed in what it takes for me to say something from here that you will understand. But when I do it with certain people, it's amazing what they don't hear. It's amazing what they try to recalibrate my commentary in ways that had nothing to do with what I said. And I've proven it over and over and over. CBS Mornings was critical of Abe's life on the day of his passing, calling him a right-wing nationalist and a polarizing figure whose political decisions were controversial. The Associated Press, normally pretty good at its neutral, swift breaking news coverage, said that Abe left a divided legacy. AP previously came under fire when social media users compared headlines of the site breaking news of Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro's deaths. Chavez, a socialist dictator, one of those totalitarians I was speaking about just a little while ago, was labeled a fiery Venezuelan leader by the AP. When the Associated Press announced the death of communist dictator Fidel Castro, they said Fidel Castro, who defied the U.S. for 50 years, dies at 90 in Cuba. They go on to talk about conservative radio icon Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh, who was a genius. I'm not going to bother with going through all the things they said about him, but in this particular article, there are a half a dozen paragraphs that talk about him. Other influential conservatives received similar treatment by the media. In 2016, following the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, a New York Times editorial described the justice as one who, quote, opposed much of the social and political progress of the late 20th century, unquote. Really? Only if it was extra constitutional. If it was outside the Constitution, yeah, it's amazing what Antonin Scalia would say about it. And moreover, how he would issue opinions about it. That same day, the Washington Post announced the news of Antonin Scalia's passing in giant letters, Supreme Court conservative dismayed liberals. Notably, the online publication of the Post announced the somber news with a less aggressive headline simply stating Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia dies at 79, which is what most of the headline should have been. The Post also came under fire in 2019 for a headline describing Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, an extremist leader of the Islamic State, as, quote, an austere religious scholar. He was kind of a murderous thug, actually. And by the way, even though I felt that way, after his death, I didn't say so. I gave it a few days. We need to make sure that we understand, all of us, that these statements are dangerous. This man who shot Shinzo Abe, he said, it was something that didn't have anything to do with politics. Something tells me that that's not real. But I could be wrong. We'll find out in the coming days. All I can say is we need to stop barking at each other and start listening to each other more. We do. But it's really amazing how tough that can be. I know. I try every single day. And I would have to describe myself with having limited success. You're listening to the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. Thanks for being here today. It's Friday. North to south, coast to coast, around the world, this is the Wells Report. What makes this different than any other news broadcast you've ever heard? Well, a bunch of things. First of all, we give you the news, the real news. This against the backdrop of Americans having the least amount of trust in the supposed mainstream media than they ever have. Ever. You're here because you want to hear the news. This, by the way, is the second of 3 podcasts that we do every single day, Monday through Friday. So not every single day, Monday through Friday. And this is Friday. And so we bring you the news, we analyze it for fact, we draw contrast between fact and news. Then I make commentary, which is not the news. It's just my opinion. My opinion is just as valuable as yours. Share it. That's why we have debate. News, analysis, commentary, debate. It's what we do here. Please feel free to join us in that debate part. That's your job, by the way. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. You can also find us on chat at some of your favorite streaming services, from Facebook to YouTube, Twitch, Twitter. And next week, there will be even more. Stay tuned. More details are coming. Facing pressure from his party to act more aggressively to safeguard abortion rights, President Joe Biden today announced new steps his administration will take, including protecting access to medication and making legal representation available to women who choose to travel out of state for the procedure. This, by the way, from USA Today. Advocacy groups have been pressing for strong action, such as a declaration of a public health emergency. Where did that come from? And leasing federal property to abortion providers. Since the recent Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, Biden has so far resisted those moves. Once again, because this is USA Today copy, it's biased. Let me try to translate that into news. Advocacy groups have been pressing for strong action, such as a declaration of a public health emergency and leasing federal property to abortion providers, since the recent Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe v. Wade. That is a euphemism for overturning the so-called constitutional right of abortion that was not created as a part of a constitutional amendment, which is how you do things in this nation, but rather the retraction of what was a terrible decision made in 1973 that cost an unbelievable number of lives. An unbelievable number of lives. This is a moment, the moment, the president said, quote, this is a moment, the moment to restore the rights that have been taken away from us. None were taken away. And the moment to protect our nation from an extremist agenda, Biden said in the White House Roosevelt Room before signing an executive order that outlines his administration will take, the steps he'll take. President Biden's order instructs the Department of Health and Human Services to protect and expand access to abortion care, including access to medication approved by the Food and Drug Administration as safe and effective for over 20 years. The order tasks the department with taking additional steps to expand access to reproductive health services, including family planning services and providers, emergency contraception, and long-acting reversible contraception like intrauterine devices, according to a fact sheet distributed by the White House. The administration is also promising to increase outreach and public education on access to reproductive health care services, including abortion, and to take steps to ensure the safety of patients and providers, including mobile clinics sent to borders to provide care for out-of-state patients. An advocacy group is pushing to restore and sustain public insurance and said Biden's actions do not go far enough. Quote, we are glad to see the White House start to implement a whole of government approach to abortion access. But this plan, which the White House committed to months ago, is both late and not enough. Those words coming from Morgan Hopkins, the interim executive director of campaigns and strategies at All * Above All. Mini Timaraju, the president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, praised Biden's order as a really strong next step, but she wants to see specific actions the administration is going to take. Well, Once again, we have a small problem when it comes to steps the administration can take. Once again, the administration does not make law. The executive branch of a tripartite American government does not make law. It supposedly enforces them. As we have lived our lives, we've noticed the cherry picking of what laws to enforce and what laws to set aside be essentially blurred. What we're not seeing is we're not seeing the government working the way it's supposed to. And the reason it's not working the way it's supposed to is because politicians don't want to make the decisions that they're charged to make. Well, that's only because we have the wrong politicians. Biden called for the creation of a task force on access to reproductive health care and sought to provide some protection to women who travel across state lines to access clinical abortion services. The Attorney General's office has been instructed to give assistance to states that offer legal protection to out-of-state patients and healthcare providers. The Attorney General and the White House Counsel Office will also convene private attorneys that offer free legal services, as well as bar associations and public interest groups to encourage legal representation to patients, providers, and other groups that provide reproductive services. Please understand that in the state of Texas, for example, if an abortion occurs after 6 to 8 weeks, where a fetal heartbeat is heard, then there is an opportunity for not just the authorities to take action, but for people who have witnessed action being taken beyond that time parameter to sue the people responsible for ending the pregnancy. So that is why we're hearing the White House counsel talk to other lawyers to provide defense for those people if and when that happens in states where that is the law. There are several. Biden has been under pressure to protect abortion rights since the Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision that established a constitutional right to abortion. Again, this is intellectually dishonest on the part of USA Today. So let's go back to a couple of other things here. Let's go back to a couple of things that what we're talking about here. What they've said is that they have asked for a public health emergency. Exactly where did that come from? Well, I'll tell you where it came from. The public health emergency that they're talking about was born of COVID-19, where suddenly leftist, totalitarian-leaning politicians realized that because of public health, what they could do is they could essentially suspend the Constitution and very important parts of it, and they did. They shut down businesses. They threw draconian policies at the people of the United States. And a lot of the politicians that were responsible for all of that paid with their jobs. And they should have. And they should have. And so when we see this idea that we can bring a public health emergency, well, you know, that was one of the precedents that I was the most nervous about when it came to COVID-19. The idea that science would be suspended, that the CDC would be essentially nothing more than an agent of political policy, and stopped actually providing statistics that we used every day. We use statistics from the CDC every single day when the COVID-19 pandemic became a real thing. At least it was cobbled up to be a real thing, in my humble opinion. That's just my opinion. And so what ended up happening was the statistics that I would get from the CDC, the agency charged with giving us real data, what they did is they started changing the real data. I noted every single time they did it right here on this broadcast, every single time. Remember, I'm not here to take public health statistics and turn it into some political rant. What I was trying to do was make sure you knew what was actually going on. And that's when I began to notice that the facts of the actual of the actual, it wasn't actually an epidemic there. It wasn't a pandemic, okay, in the loose form of the word, yeah, because this same disease was circling the globe, but it was a relatively bad flu for all intents and purposes, which is not to denigrate those people that actually suffered real damage because of this. But what I ended up seeing was that the CDC statistics were contrary, sometimes outrightly so, to the political messaging about COVID 19. And I noted that on this broadcast. That's where politics became more important than reality, or another instance of it. And then all of a sudden, gosh, we've got to declare gun violence as an epidemic. And now we have to declare the fact that Roe v. Wade, a bad decision to begin with, creating a right that never existed, was somehow corrected by a Supreme Court that has been under withering criticism ever since, only by people that don't know what they're talking about, which once again exposes the breadth and depth of the failure of news. We didn't do those things here. I was working as hard as I possibly could just to bring you data. Well, then the CDC started playing around with the data. And they started pursuing a political jag on the management of this disease. There were lots of ways to treat that particular disease that were immediately denigrated by anybody with a leftist lean, including the CDC, just because President Trump said, hey, there's medications for this stuff. We actually have a pretty good idea what the actual infectious process was and what it does to people and so on and so forth. And we have drugs, including one set of drugs that was set aside by the CDC as an approved treatment. And the only person that ever actually reported that was me, because I watched the news, or I watched the news reporting like a hawk. And so what happened with it? Well, it established this precedent. Well, it's a public health emergency. What isn't? Well, in the ways of leftist politics, everything is a public health emergency. As far as this particular executive order is concerned, presidents don't make law. They do not make law. And what does that show us? That shows us that this infra government, abandoned by, has nothing to do with the U.S. Code. In other words, all the laws of the land has nothing to do with it. This collection of executive branch agencies with their own regulations supplanting American law. And during the Obama and Trump interactions regarding executive orders, a president can issue an executive order, the next president can turn it aside. Except in the case of John Roberts saying, no, you really can't turn an executive order aside, thereby entrenching an opportunity for presidents to make law from the Oval Office without benefit of legislature or anything of the kind. More coming up. This is the Wells Report. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. The president today signed an executive order, and in that executive order, what he did is he had this statement. And there was an unfortunate moment in that statement. It was just sent to me by a dear friend of the Wells Report. And I have to point this out because it's newsworthy. Let me see if I can help you hear this.
Power. It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who registered to vote.
Hang on a second. I'm sorry. Hang on just a moment here. Let me try it again. Okay, here's the President of the United States speaking during the occasion of him signing an executive order supposedly protecting women's rights that were supposedly overturned by the Roe v. Wade decision.
It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who registered to vote and cast a ballot is consistently higher than the percentage of the men who do so. End of quote. Repeat the line.
End of quote. Repeat the line. The president is not aware that what's on the teleprompter is giving him two sets of directions. The teleprompter gives him the script of the speech and then also gives him other directions. The other direction was repeat the line. It tells you something about the guy who's doing it. We have a sincere problem here. In just this day alone, regarding the death of Shinzo Abe, the president of the United States referred to him as Abe Shinzo. It may not seem like a big deal, but can you imagine the president of the United States on the occasion of the assassination death of a fellow world leader would get his name wrong? I'm not being picky. I'm just pointing out the news. So when we talk about this particular set of news from USA Today in this case, talking about how the president acted to safeguard abortion rights. There are all kinds of problems with this executive order. It covers things that aren't issues. It's essentially an opportunity to quell the leftist uprising in his own party. But there is something here that I believe we should discuss. And that has to do with their use of the term reproductive medical care, reproductive health services. Forgive me if I get this wrong, and by all means, if I do, please do correct me. You can do it on chat, or you can do it by calling me at 817-379-2172. Reproductive health services. Reproduction is a process where a male of the species consorts with a female of the species in a mating act that creates a newborn. Reproduction includes the newborn. It is not reproductive health services, because the lion's share of all this work is to remove the newborn. Therefore, it is not reproduction. It is the ending of reproduction. It's not reproductive health services. It's reproductive cessation activity. And once again, that may seem to be a small thing. But the reality of it is something that's being hidden by the people that champion it so much. And it's not so much that you can agree or disagree with that. It's that the level of deception involved in actual description speaks volumes, more volumes, in fact, than the actual story. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Thanks very much for joining us today. So on the chat room today, a dear friend of the broadcast said, someone told me that Texas legislators are trying to make it illegal for Texans to leave the state for an abortion, and if they return to Texas, they could be prosecuted. Well, the simple case of that matter is you cannot stop an American citizen from traveling state to state anytime they choose. You also cannot prosecute someone for something they do in that other state that violates the state of the law that they left. That's simply not ever going to happen. Though they can make the law if they want to, but it'll be turned aside so fast that the ink won't be dry on the actual bill before it's set aside by a court. What needs to happen at this particular moment, I told you about this, the Roe v. Wade decision is going to empower people beyond their intellectual capacity. And that's going to be on both sides of the ledger. We've been talking about how the left has gone through this spasm of panic. And the right is in a situation where, they feel now, apparently some people in the right feel that, well, we've been right all along, and by golly, we're going to take care of this mess. Again, empowered beyond their intellectual capacities. These people will pay for making these mistakes. These people will pay. All we have to do is we have to understand that this process, this is a 50-year pendulum swing. An unconstitutional creation of a constitutional right that survived a half a century because the politics were so lurid and so terrible on both sides that nobody could possibly discuss this rationally. And we see that to this day. There are simple solutions to all of this. Absolute simple solutions. But these politicians would rather have the issue than a solution because it's so handy. Such a handy tool to have around. Except it destroys the country every time it's brought up. Will this eventually lead to a better circumstance for people of the United States, all people of the United States? Yes, it will. Will there be tragedies that go on between now and then? Yes. Yes. But you need to keep in mind something. Roe v. Wade was cobbled up in 1973. The idea that America's poorer neighborhoods and poorer communities paid in the hard expense of, shall we say, unproductive health services. It killed about 1 million people every year, just in the black community. And just from one abortion provider, Planned Parenthood, who operated with federal money, courtesy of that great society back in the mid-60s. So whatever tragedies may occur is going to pale in comparison to the, okay, I'll call it the way I see it, my opinion, a genocide that cost us 50 million African Americans in this nation. 50 million. That's a genocide. 1 million people lost every year for 50 years. It's outrageous. And there are people all throughout the left that are standing for this and this policy and so on and so forth. How can you describe it? How can you actually know the facts and not look at this for what it is? The eugenicist, atheist, crazy woman that was also racist, who wanted to use this as a way to quell the growth of America's black population, was successful beyond her wildest dreams. This is the result of eugenics, and it's something that lasted just long enough so that people think it's okay because they haven't been told the truth about it. That's why I was discussing all these conflicts in terms. These terms of art used to soft pedal the reality. Well, this is an awful circumstance that needs to be dealt with swiftly. How do we do with it? How do we deal with it? Real simple. We determine when life begins. We know when life ends. We need to determine when life begins. That's all it takes. After that, whole problem goes away. Goes away. I'm going to live to see that, I'm sure of it. But this supposed empowerment of women that has now been taken away isn't empowerment. It's not empowerment. Empowerment is realizing the realities of your circumstance, also soft-pedaled. Somehow women are simply not responsible for the fact that they make the babies. In fact, we are so sure of it, we've even tried to blur what a woman is. The NEA saying, well, there are birthing parents and non-birthing parents. Those people need to crawl back into the utopian nut farm that they came from and continue talking about how brilliant they are to each other and leave the rest of society alone. That's, again, just my humble opinion. But the lies on both sides of this over this entire issue for decades. At least now we have a catalyst, an agent of change to perhaps do something about it. Here's something else from America's so-called mainstream media. This is awful. Many undocumented women already had limited access to abortion care before the Supreme Court ruling last month, striking down nationwide rights to abortion. It's not a nationwide right. Now, with states taking steps to outlaw or limit abortion access, many women without legal immigration status are in a more vulnerable position, in part because of the community's already tenuous relationship with law enforcement, limited access to health insurance and health care, and low wages. There really is a simple solution to this. And the simple solution is to say no, thank you, no, or not even thank you. Just say no. Just say no. You don't have to be a victim of your reproductive capability. You can be responsible. You can do responsible things. That same Planned Parenthood talks about how you really don't need any money. We'll be more than happy to help you out. Just walk into a Planned Parenthood office. You can get all kinds of contraception, from intrauterine devices to the pill and any number of things. Bring a wheelbarrow and they'll fill it with condoms for you. All paid for by United States taxpayer money, by the way. You don't have to prove your citizenship. So why are we reading this story in the pages of USA Today? That's the lying I'm talking about. They're trying to turn this into it's a horrifying effect of the Roe v. Wade decision. Undocumented immigrants will have their access to reproductive health care, whatever that is, taken away. Well, pardon me, but it seems to me that any services from the United States of America at any level for any reason is a bonus, because you're not here legally. You have no legal right to access anything in the United States. None. And so somebody's trying to make a big deal out of this? Really? The somebody is USA Today. Why? Because they're not an American newspaper. It should be ULA today, the United Leftist Association today. You need to report real news, and that means it should be accurate. If you're going to point out something that skirts the line of opinion, then say so. In the opinion of ULA today, we happen to believe that it's a bad idea for undocumented women to not be able to have full access to the reproductive health services available in the United States. But this is just a cynical abuse of the people of the United States. It doesn't do the immigrants any good either. Now, this is the dishonesty that I talk about around this entire issue. Why? Why do we deal with it? Well, because we always have. Things will change. Mistakes will be made. That will be okay. It'll cause problems. And there'll be real problems. And there will be people who pay with their political careers on both sides of this. Right now, the left is trying to lure the Democrat Party into becoming the party of legalized abortion at all levels. That's what they're trying to lure the Democrat Party into. That's the decision they're trying to lure the Democrat Party into. The Democrat Party, like it or not, is smarter than this. This is why they're skirting this issue. This is why they're trying to wriggle out of the vice that the Supreme Court has put them in. All this brave talk about codifying Roe v. Wade, well, they've had their chances. Why haven't they acted on them? Because they don't want to become the party of abortion. Because if they become the party of abortion, they're going to lose something north of 50% of American voters. Forever. And they know it. And they are being egged into it. You see, I brought this up on this broadcast a long time ago, where I was talking about the unholy alliance between the Democrat Party and the American news media, where the American news media became the stenography service for the American left. And when somebody from the right wing, say for example, needed to be stopped, Sarah Palin, for example, the news media dutifully did their job. And Sarah Palin shows up on a Sunday or on a weekday morning show. It was Good Morning America with Charlie Gibson. And Charlie Gibson asked her a question that she wasn't prepared to answer. And then made fun of her because she did it. And then, of course, we turn the tables on that. And what ends up happening is we hear how leftist female politicians are being sundered by a mainly white, mainly male-dominated press institution. Where were they when Sarah Palin got hammered by Charlie Gibson on national television? Where were they? Nowhere. And that continues to this day. It continues to this day. And we have to stop it. How do we stop it? You stop watching it. Well, wait a minute, John David, we already have. It got so bad at CNN, they fired the guy responsible for it. They've got somebody else in there, but what's he going to do? Well, he's going to fire a whole bunch of people that started out their careers at CNN doing journalism and ended up being really bad political commentators. He's going to have to fire all those people. Well, how do you fire an entire on-air news staff? Well, you certainly don't do it all at once. It's going to take 10 years for CNN to crawl out of the hole that these leftist politicians have put them in. And if the Democrat Party becomes the party of abortion and immediately loses something north of 50% of American voters forever, that's an existential threat to the Democrat Party as well. And they have no excuse. They've been warned for decades. They've had their opportunity. And to be fair, the Republican Party had something to do with Obamacare, saying that they were going to turn it aside 73 times, and then when they had their chance, they blew it. Yeah, this is a political thing. More about that in a moment. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Once again, 817-379-2172. Arizona did something interesting the other day. Let's talk a little bit about it. Lawmakers in as many as 1 in 5 states have considered legislation requiring voters show proof of citizenship. Strangely enough, that requirement has drawn a federal lawsuit. It's plain American law that the people that vote in American elections be American citizens. What's the federal government doing? Why would the federal government sue a state for requiring their voters to prove that they're American citizens? Well, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get rid of this law in time for the 2022 election. More about that in a moment. A new Arizona law that was signed by Governor Doug Ducey hailed as a victory for election integrity that could be a model for similar restrictions around the country is now being challenged as a textbook violation of federal law. The Justice Department sued the state to stop the law requiring voters to provide documented proof of citizenship from going into effect in January of 2023, saying it could disenfranchise thousands of voters. Yeah, the non-American citizens. This is the Department of Justice. Okay, so it's not a problem for the 2022 election. Okay, because the law doesn't go into effect until January of 2023. But the Department of Justice is saying it's a textbook violation of federal law. What federal law? Could disenfranchise thousands of voters. Yeah, the ones that aren't American citizens. Hello? Voting rights advocates say requiring documented proof of citizenship hurts voters without the resources or time to navigate the complicated bureaucracy that warehouse documents. How about this? How about passing law that decomplicates the bureaucracy and simplifies the navigation? Yeah. And the electoral consequences, they say, could be significant in places where margins are razor thin. President Biden beat former President Donald Trump by 10,457 votes in Arizona, where about 4.3 million voters are registered. How many of those votes, how many of that vote tally is due to the fact that non-citizens were voting? Oh, there's John Wells with another one of these dang conspiracy theories. The answer to that question is none of us know. None of us know. Because all these people were successful in, except in Texas and maybe some other states, at making it impossible for people to vote without showing a picture ID. And so now citizenship, American citizenship, is a problem? Really? 10,457 votes. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot of logical training to be able to listen to these 3 paragraphs and not draw a conclusion that people know full well that people have no business voting in American elections are indeed doing so. And is ably assisted by the government of the United States. Let's go back and forensically parse this out. This is the fact-finding thing, the analysis I'm talking about. The Justice Department sued the state of Arizona to stop the law requiring voters to provide documented proof of citizenship, saying it could disenfranchise thousands of voters. Really? So they're worried about disenfranchising thousands of voters, which apparently were not disenfranchised in the last election, right? Because the law wasn't in effect. Voting rights advocates say requiring documented proof of citizenship hurts voters without the resources or time to navigate complicated bureaucracies that warehouse documents. Yes, indeed, being an American citizen is demanding. You really got to kind of sort of know your crap. And the electoral consequences, they say, could be significant in places where margins are razor thin. President Joe Biden beat former President Donald Trump by 10,457 votes in Arizona. President Trump lost in Georgia by 11,000 votes. And the Department of Justice says that it could disenfranchise thousands of voters. This is a smoking gun. It tells us at once that the Department of Justice is playing politics with American law. Again, they have admitted that thousands of voters could be disenfranchised if you prove that they're American citizens. I'm still trying to figure out how it was that there are only 165 million registered voters in the United States, yet somehow 155 million voters voted in the 2020 election, which is a 95% turnout, which is impossible. How can we have that many voters turn out for an election when it's too difficult to navigate the bureaucracies to prove that you're an American citizen? All you got to do is read the news. You just read the news and things become pretty simple. You're listening to The Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. Thanks very much for being here today. Glad you're here on Friday. Thanks for sharing it with me. north to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. How are you? This is hour number 3. There are 2 other hours that you ought to pay attention to because they're kind of good. I describe this broadcast and I say to people, you know, if I wasn't doing this show, I'd be listening to it. Why? Is it because I just really like me? No. No, I really like news. I like that there are still people out there that, say, for example, realize that the actual information that is shared between people, normally known as news, is more important than the political stances and beliefs and ideologies of people reporting that news. Do I share all that? Yes, I do. It's the weakness of this broadcast, actually. You know, I fight with it all the time. I know exactly what I'm trying to do here. I am trying to, without bias, report the news. A lot of people say, John David, well, you use a collection of news services. I do. And what I do is I'll grab a bunch of stories, and then what I'll do is I'll try to find a balance with them. I use USA Today, Fox News. I use CNN. I go offshore. Whenever I pick a story, then I try to find out more about it. What I do is I coalesce all this stuff, and then I know for a fact that to my marrow, I'm simply trying to pass these facts along to you. Now, when I'm in a situation where I report that news, and I do, there is a caveat in that what I try to do is I try to take the dishonesty out of the news articles based on bias. Now, is that based on my politics? No. It's based on my knowledge of what is news and what is editorial political content. And so I differentiate that. Remember, I tell you that we report the news, then we analyze it for fact. Well, that's the analysis part. It's misunderstood purposefully by most people. A lot of people get it. But then what ends up happening is that then I do make commentary. That is my opinion. But I differentiate between the news and my opinion, and I start every hour by saying something along this line. My opinion is not news. Not news. Your opinion is not news. Don Lemon's opinion is not news. Sean Hannity's opinion is not news. Tucker Carlson's opinion is not news. Laura Ingram's opinion is not news. All these people, not news. Jake Tapper's opinions aren't news. But they don't tell you that. Don Lemon extols the virtues of his infallible intellectual process to the point that he's blinded about the fact that his intellectual process is skewed and flawed. And all you got to do is listen to him. Is there a bias on the broadcast? Yes, it's plain and it's very straightforward, and I talk about it all the time. This broadcast is based on the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and those brilliant essays referred to as the Federalist Papers, actually known as the Federalist, that explained all the thinking behind everything that created the greatest political document in the history of the human endeavor, the Constitution. 4 pages. 4. A document that is regularly misunderstood, misstated, mischaracterized, just plain lied about by these very same people that assure you that their opinion is news. So there is a bias, but you know what it is. I believe that the American government should operate to the benefit of the American people. I don't believe that the American government should work to the benefit of Democratic people or Democrat people or Republican people. I believe it should operate in the interests of the people instead of the interests of itself. So there, the bias. And the part where I fight is when I tell you what I think. Yes, I differentiate. But this particular political discourse has been so poisoned by people who assure you that their opinion is news that they miss everything. They miss everything, and so do the people that listen to them. And then to add insult to injury and insult to the American people, what they'll say is after they spout this particular opinion, they will denigrate those people who don't share it. I don't do that. I don't do that here. I'll ask you questions, and they're hard ones. It's not an open book test. But I will ask you questions. Usually revolves around the Constitution. You know, for example, and by the way, when I bring up biased news services, I consider Fox News to be biased as well. But I have the time every single day to go through all these news articles and find the bias and try to present a balanced broadcast. Is that just because I'm a great guy? No. No, it's because it's a mission. It started on September 12th. No, actually, it started on September 11th. The first broadcast of the Wells Report was on September 11th, 2001, when I made the decision that I was going to stop being the happy-go-lucky guy talking about stuff you talk about around the water cooler. You know, episodes of Friends and all, and The Big Bang Theory and all that other stuff. And I decided to try to give you information that you could base sound decisions on. Note, I didn't say the right decision, a decision. So that's what this broadcast is all about. If you're new, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of the show. Now, I'm going to launch into an article here and some commentary that you need to pay. One, you need to listen to what I'm actually saying. And you need to be aware that I'm basing this on a news article from Fox News that is biased. But I'm not basing my opinions on it based on that bias. Once again, I'm basing it on the facts that I read. And you're going to say, well, John David's being tough on the president, being tough on Democrats, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you need to stick with me on this one. Don't leave in the middle, okay? Don't leave in the middle. Several GOP lawmakers sharply criticized President Joe Biden today, or actually yesterday, following reports that emergency U.S. oil was being sent to China and other nations. You see, the President of the United States curtailed American energy production. It was a calculated move under the guise of trying to move us to a different kind of economy. The only problem with it is that there has been no preparation for a different kind of economy. There is no infrastructure in place. Nothing is happening that makes things even possible. They're trying to move us away from so-called fossil fuels, which are not fossil fuels at all. The process that makes those fuels, coal, petroleum, natural gas, they're ongoing. That's why in 1973, when everybody started talking about the fact that we're going to run out of oil, oh my God, we've got more harvestable oil now than we did in 1973. The oil patch keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But people bought it. The term fossil fuel has been proven to be a lie. We have centuries worth of this so-called fossil fuel. And regardless of what these leftist, progressive, socialist, anti-American fascists want to tell you about how the sky is falling, the Chicken Little agenda, regardless of all of that, I am very, very sure that in 100, probably less than 100 years, petroleum will be obsolete. We will have progressed beyond it. Hopefully we'll survive the process. Cross your fingers. But we'll figure out another source of energy that will render oil as just kind of a messy, gooey ooze. because the technology curve in the United States and elsewhere keeps getting steeper. The amount of time being the baseline, the number of technological achievements being the other axis, and that curve keeps getting steeper and steeper and steeper. There's less time between each amazing technological innovation. And I'm sure that this is all essentially just being done for short term political gain. What would be the gain in this case, John David? Why? Well, the gain in this case is to provide the federal government with more money and very little else. President Biden, as a matter of record, this is a fact, said that he was not going to raise taxes on the middle class. Inflation is a tax hike on the middle class. It is brutal. It's taking somewhere around $10,000 a year out of your budget, and it's going to get worse. We should go to a green economy. We should do all of that kind of stuff. Well, okay, a solar-powered car is simply not available. Oh, there's one that there's several that have been made. They look like cockroaches, actually. It's very, very funny. And they're very, very lightweight. And you have to get the smallest person in the world to drive the thing or it won't move. If the government was serious about going to this green technology, they'd be working on superconductors, but they're not, are they? No, what they're doing is they're trying to destroy American energy. Because you've got to get control of American energy, you've got to get control of fuel, of food, you've got to get control of medical care in order to get control of a populace. And so the reason we're paying somewhere around $5 a gallon for fuel is because it's raising enormous tax money, because all the other products that rely on fuel and diesel and so on and so forth, those prices have to go up. And as those prices go up, tax revenue goes up. That's the long and short of all of this economic machinations. The problem with this is that when you start pouring gasoline on a fire, sometimes you get something beyond what you're hoping for, and that is a wildfire. We had one coming out of the Carter administration, and the same things that were being talked about then are being talked about now, and the same result is on the way. If we fixed our energy issues today, it would be 2 years before we'd start seeing any benefit. I don't care who's in office. And we're not going to fix it today. And so the president, because he got hammered for high gas prices, said, well, we'll release petroleum from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And now we're finding out that a lot of that oil, if not all of it, is going offshore to places like China and other countries. How is sending oil to China going to get our gas prices down? The answer is it won't. And there are other caveats, and I'll bring them up in a moment. And by the way, the Republicans, the GOP, are hammering President Biden for allowing this emergency oil to go to China. Yeah, I got something to say about them too. Stay put. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We're discussing the GOP and how they are hammering the Biden administration because oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserves is being sold on the world market. Seriously? Yeah, that's unfortunately true. How is selling Strategic Petroleum Reserve petroleum on the world market going to lower American gas prices? As we have seen, it does not. But don't worry. I'm gonna throw a hard inside pitch to the Republicans here in just a minute. Stand by. More than 5 million barrels of oil released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve have been diverted to European and Asian nations instead of U.S. refiners, this according to Reuters. That's a British news organization. Biden has ordered the Department of Energy to release a total of 260 million barrels of oil stored in the SPR over the last 8 months to combat record fuel prices hitting American consumers. The American people, this is a quote, the American people deserve answers as to why our emergency energy reserves are being sent to foreign adversaries like the Chinese Communist Party, compromising our energy security and national security. This according to House Energy and Commerce Committee ranking member Kathy McMorris. President Biden needs to remember that our strategic energy reserves are for emergencies, not to cover up bad politics. That's according to, once again, Kathy McMorris. America needs to flip the switch and increase our capacity to produce and refine our oil here at home. Now is not the time to use the strategic stockpile. McMorris Rogers and Representative Fred Upton, the Republican from Michigan, the top Republican on the panel's energy subcommittee, penned a letter to Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm in early June demanding information about how the administration's SPR policy, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, was emboldening China. The two GOP leaders noted similar reports that China had purchased oil from U.S. energy reserves or emergency reserves to bolster its own stockpiles. McMorris Rogers told Fox News that the committee has still not received a response from Granholm or the administration's mismanagement of the U.S. oil stockpile. What do they have to hide? The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is meant for national emergencies, not policy blunders. The administration still has not answered congressional questions on its mismanagement of the SPR. Meanwhile, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve level has fallen to about 492 million barrels of oil, the lowest level since December of 1985. This, according to the Energy Information Administration, the current level is also 20% lower than its level recorded days prior to President Biden's release in late November. The SPR was established by the 1975 Energy Policy and Conservation Act to help the U.S. mitigate the impacts of future severe energy supply interruptions. Remember, in 1973, the Arab oil embargo essentially sent waves through the American economy. Inflation got to about 17%. 17%. You think it's bad now? Wait until it gets into double digits again. It's headed there. They can't possibly miss. We will have double-digit inflation. There's no way to stop it now. I was talking about getting a wildfire. Yeah. You start playing around with the economy at this level, you start talking about the basics of our economy, and energy is one of them. You start messing around with that stuff, things get out of control real fast. In the Carter administration, at least, that was an external wobble through the entire economy. That came from the Arab oil embargo. This is self-inflicted. What are we doing? Now, don't forget, the high hard one is coming to the Republican Party here in just a couple of minutes. I'm just going through this article right now. Okay? We'll get to them in just a second. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. We will be back in moments for more of the Wells Report. Stay right there. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number 817-999-4499. That is not our telephone number. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. I don't know what that other number was. So we're talking about just exactly where the oil release that the Biden administration put out to lower the price of gasoline, where that oil actually went. It didn't stay on shore. It went offshore. Really? President Trump filled the Strategic Petroleum Reserve with cheap oil back during his administration when the United States was energy independent. That was cheap oil. So the amount of money less the amount of cost of whatever it took to store it, that's all profit margin. For who? Who's that profit margin going to? I wonder. Also, I keep thinking about those deals that were made by the Bidens in China. And I'm not the only one that thought about this. I have to be perfectly honest with you. I have been listening to Republican commentators essentially saying that the Biden administration is in the bag for China. And they make a good case. But I'm still in kind of a situation where I don't believe that newscasters really ought to accuse the president or his family of high crimes and misdemeanors unless there is actual proof. So I've been soft pedaling an awful lot of that. You send 5 million barrels of oil to China, you really have to know. You really have to know where that's coming from. Don't you? Yeah. Kind of have to know that stuff. And there have been aspersions cast. But let me bring something up here. And this is the high hard one going at the Republican Party. The GOP hammers President Biden for allowing emergency oil reserves to go to China, compromising our energy security. And by golly, people say, thank goodness for those Republicans. Finally pointing the finger. Yeah, boy. Yeah, buddy. Well, you'll note that the Republican Party has been, as a party, reasonably silent when it comes to President Biden. They're unwilling to engage in actual fierce debate because they say, well, we don't have the House of Representatives and we don't have the Senate and we don't have the presidency. But now they're going at the president pretty harshly. Do you ever wonder why? I'll tell you why. Because the president's approval numbers are in the dumper. And the Republican Party is taking the opportunity to be able to take shots at President Biden without having to worry about the unbelievable backlash that the Democrat Party would invariably come up with if the president was in a stronger position. Very much like the shots being taken at President Obama and how that came back to haunt the Republicans for making those accusations. Well, now they don't have to worry about that because in the very similar way that the Republican Party sabotaged the Trump administration, the Democrat Party is not really concerned about sabotaging the Biden administration. Why is that? Well, because the Democrat Party is going to take it in the pants in the next election. Hard. And the people that are running the Biden administration, and there are people running the Biden administration, they're just going to cast Joe Biden adrift. They're going to blame it all on him and say, got to resign, man. They've already laid the groundwork. President Trump saw it first. He passed a resolution regarding the 25th Amendment in the House of Representatives, where the House of Representatives could strengthen their position in declaring a president mentally incompetent. That wasn't to take out President Trump. That was to take out Joe Biden, and President Trump said so. Today, when he was talking about the executive order that he signed regarding abortion rights, so-called abortion rights in the United States, he got to the end of a sentence, and then he got some direction on the teleprompter that said, repeat that sentence, and he just read it. Blah, 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 unquote, repeat the sentence. That's what he said. There's already scrambling being done. It's in the pages of the Washington Examiner. There's already backlash from that. The president is a puppet. President's a puppet. Somebody else is writing everything that he says. And apparently they're not going over it with him. He has a checklist of things he's supposed to do that includes walking in the room and taking your seat. And he showed it to the people that were covering him, oblivious to what it was going to mean. And so, the Democrat Party, I'm not going to defend this president. They can't. The president's indefensible. And so the Republican Party suddenly finds their voice. My God, he's selling oil to China. Yeah, he's selling oil to China, all right. Normally, Nancy Pelosi would come up with some snarky, snappy answer that would immediately be sucked up by all the liberal news outlets. But now the liberal news outlets are also stopping President Biden. This president is going to be primaried by his own party, and they're going to be good primary candidates. I don't think the Biden administration is going to last beyond much longer than the 2022 election. The only thing that would stop them from removing Joe Biden from office is, what do you do about Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris is worse than Joe Biden from a standpoint of the puppeteers trying to run the Biden administration. Because she's got a tood. And she'll get upset. And she can't be forced into playing the game. Well, for that reason, President Biden can't be forced into playing the game. He's there talking yesterday, and he says, I'm going to tell you a story. They told me not to, but I'm going to. Then he goes off on this meandering ramble. I don't know how they got word to him to say, get back to the script, get back to the script. Who's writing the script? But the Republican Party, somehow finding its voice after realizing that their big brothers will not stomp on them because they're interested in seeing the demise of the Biden administration too. Now they're stomping on the president for selling oil to China. Well, that is bad. You have to consider this. If you voted for Joe Biden, you've been taken for a ride because you don't have any idea who's running the Biden administration. You have no idea. Neither do I. Neither does anybody. I can guess. Certainly not President Obama directly, but Susan Rice and John Brennan and James Comey and James Clapper and all those guys, Valerie Jarrett, all those people from the Obama administration, probably in consultation with President Obama. That's my guess. But the president is a walking, talking toy. He's a guy that reads a teleprompter. That's not presidential governance. And you voted for him. And if you listen to this broadcast, you voted for him even though I said, you vote for this guy, you have no idea who's going to be running the government. I said that 4 years ago on this broadcast. Am I taking shots at the president? No, I'm reporting the news. That's what I'm doing. And that's the news. Well, what about that truth spoken here thing? You know what I'm saying is true. It's inescapable. Absolutely inescapable. Because you got to think beyond your politics. And it really doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference whatsoever what your politics are or who you voted for or so on and so forth, because when it comes right down to it, we're all in this together. You and your right-wing buddies and you with your left-wing buddies, we're all in this together. We're all paying $5 a gallon for gas. We're watching things go south in the United States economy pretty damn quickly. And we're all being affected by it. Not the least of which we see crazy people wandering around in gender inappropriate clothing, extolling the virtues of their sex life and being appointed to high government executive power posts. Is that what you voted for? Well, you know, it comes with what you did vote for. All the rest of this garbage. A birthing parent and a non-birthing parent. All this leftist crazy garbage comes with what you might have thought was a reasonable vote. It's not reasonable. Not reasonable at all. And you know, maybe it's just because I've been around a while or whatever it is. Maybe that's it. But I can see right through all this. And I'm not seeing it because I'm a Trump voter or I'm conservative or people think I'm a Republican. I most assuredly am not. Most assuredly I'm not. I can see this because it's obvious to me. You know, it's like cracking a whip. You know, you take a bullwhip and you throw it out there, and there's this really kind of pretty curve of the leather. And then as that wave promulgates through the lever, it gets to the end, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the velocity increases so much that the tip of the whip breaks the sound barrier. There's a loud crack. You see, it might be reasonable to just create that nice little wave, but at the end of it, there's going to be a nasty smack. And if it touches you, it's going to hurt you. Well, once you get that process started, it's started. It's really, really hard to stop that process. The only way you can stop it is to drop the whip out of your hand. That's the only thing you can do. That's all you can do. Because it takes all the energy out of it. It stops the promulgation of the power wave. In this particular analogy, it would mean that the Biden administration would immediately have to reverse course on the Keystone XL pipeline, would immediately have to remove all of the red tape having to do with energy production in the United States, and get that energy production underway immediately. And then stand up in front of the American people and say, you know what, we were wrong. We made a mistake. We sent a wave through the energy industry that was unfair and unjust and disastrous. And that's where we are right now. It's on us. By the way, if you're wondering if there's a precedent on that, it's exactly what Bill Clinton did. When things started to go south in the Clinton administration economically, he said the era of big government is over. The problem with it is the people running the Biden administration, at least in my analysis, they can't let go of the whip. They can't make that policy pivot because they're trying to change the nation. They're trying to turn it into the nightmare that people are trying to escape by flooding the American border. Socialist governmental rule. They're trying to bring that to the United States. And of course, they would be responsible for all of the great things that would happen after that. My gosh, as soon as we have all electric cars and all electric houses and finally have enough actual power generation to actually power all that stuff, it'll be great. Except it'll never get here. This utopian ideology is dangerous and deadly. You're listening to The Wells Report. Back in a moment. You are listening to The Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. That's our telephone number. Give us a call. Maxine Waters. She called to harass Trump administration officials in public. Get in their faces. Make them uncomfortable. Those words came out years ago. Different administration at a different time. But the echoes are everywhere. Supreme Court Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh slipped out the back door of a Washington, D.C. restaurant after pro-choice protesters received a tip of where he was dining. From who? From who? Demonstrators were told the conservative justice, who voted in favor of overturning a woman's right to an abortion under Roe v. Wade in June. By the way, this is FoxNews.com copy. He did not vote in favor of overturning a woman's right to an abortion. He voted to turn aside a bad Supreme Court decision that usurped the Constitution itself. There is a difference. And these words matter. He was eating at Morton's Steakhouse. Protesters gathered in front of the restaurant while organizers of the event called the restaurant manager and demanded that Kavanaugh be made to leave. Fox News cannot reach the Supreme Court or Morton's for comment. In a statement to the D.C. publication, the steakhouse said, Honorable Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh and all of our other patrons in the restaurant were unduly harassed by unruly protesters while eating dinner at our restaurant. Politics, regardless of your side or views, should not trample the freedom at play of the right to congregate and eat dinner. There's a time and place for everything. Disturbing the dinner of all of our customers was an act of selfishness and void of decency. Kavanaugh reportedly did not see or hear the protesters, ate a full meal according to Politico before he left out the back door. Kavanaugh is one of 6 conservative-appointed justices who voted last month in the landmark decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The move prompted a number of states to ban access to an abortion across the country, and protesters from the nation have posted up outside the justice's home. Where's the DOJ? Where is the DOJ? Not to be found anywhere. Not to be found anywhere. Only a month after someone tried to assassinate this very same associate justice, Playbook from Politico reported that Wednesday night, D.C. protesters targeting the conservative Supreme Court justices who signed the Dobbs decision overturning the constitutional right, which does not exist. Protesters showed up front, etc., etc., etc. And then leftist news commentators started tweeting. Justice Brett Kavanaugh had to exit through the rear of Morton's on Wednesday night after D.C. protesters showed up front. Politics should not trample the freedom at play to congregate and eat dinner. The spokesman said there's a time and place for everything. According to the outlet, a person familiar with the situation said that Kavanaugh didn't see it. I'm sure he did. I really can't get over the fact that the right was taken away from the country. About 75% of the country says that's a real problem, said Elie Mystal. 25% of us are angry about it and using whatever voices we have to protest and not comply with that. Mystal also wrote, imagine lying to a Congress and American people to get an unaccountable job for life, getting that job, using your unaccountable power to take away rights, then getting upset, that's not the word she used, that people you hurt interrupted your ice cream. Charlotte Clymer, the liberal author, said, I really couldn't give an S word. That Brett Kavanaugh's overpriced state dinner was made unpleasant by women calling out his sociopathic behavior. She also wrote, if you're appalled the protesters yelled outside a restaurant where Brett Kavanaugh was eating and find that to be uncivil, wait until you hear about the 10-year-old girl who had to travel to Indiana for medical care because Ohio wouldn't permit her safe access to an abortion. That's just plain stupid. A pregnant 10-year-old is a crime. I'm sure the Ohio police would have something to say about that. And I'm sure that any emergency room in Ohio would be more than happy to take care of the issue surrounding what is pedophilia. But these people just don't think. They just don't think. HuffPost senior editor Andy Campbell accused Politico of clutching its pearls over the story and seemed to doubt the seriousness of the account. Politico clutching its pearls today after a handful of unruly protesters targeted Brett Kavanaugh standing outside his steak dinner. Just an absolutely terrifying night for Kavanaugh. Yeah, because he was almost assassinated the other day. So, Maxine, you still think that people ought to go ahead and get in the faces of these people and make them uncomfortable? I know you said that years ago. You probably wouldn't say that today. I would at least hope you wouldn't. But your comments lead people to action. Are they unbalanced? Uh-huh. But you don't get real, honest, committed protesters without getting crazy people too. You just don't. Yeah. By the way, Keith Olbermann mocked Kavanaugh's ruined dinner with some legal humor, tweeting Justice Kavanaugh had to leave a D.C. restaurant by the back door after protesters appeared. His right to congregate and eat dinner had been violated. Silly Kavanaugh. Originalists vote to note that the Constitution never mentions dinner. Keith, why did you ruin your career? Thanks for listening to the Wells Report this week. We'll see you Monday for another edition of this broadcast. Until then, be safe. Make good decisions. I'll talk to you.